Hey everyone, welcome to the show. So picture this, a Capcom sci-fi game gets announced, years go by, the trailers stay weird as hell, and the whole time half the audience is basically staring at the screen going, okay, but what is this thing? I'm Lucas Everett, this is Respawn Rant, and today we're digging into Pragmata, which, honestly, had to survive one of the roughest pre-launch vibes a new IP can get. Not because people hated it. Weirdly, almost the opposite. It spent so long as this mysterious, cool-looking, long-delayed object in the distance that it stopped feeling like a normal game release and started feeling like vaporware fan fiction. You see a trailer, you see a lunar station, you see this clean, expensive-looking sci-fi art direction, and your brain starts doing dangerous things. It starts filling in the blanks. And whenever players fill in the blanks for years, that is where trouble spawns. I know this one personally. Not on Capcom scale, obviously, but I've lived through a delayed launch where silence turned every missing detail into a theory thread. Community imagination is like the hardest boss in game development. It does not miss. And that's why the big question with Pragmata isn't just, is it good? It's whether it was worth the wait. Different test. Meaner test. A normal new IP gets to walk in, introduce itself, maybe stumble a little, maybe charm you anyway. Pragmata walks in carrying years of expectation, confusion, memes, and that very specific gamer side eye of, all right, Capcom, show me the build. No, really, show me. What helps immediately is that it does have identity. That's huge. The lunar station setting pops fast. The visual design has that polished, high contrast, sterile-but-haunted sci-fi look that makes screenshots stick in your head. And maybe my favorite thing about its first impression is that it still keeps a little of that, what even is this game energy without feeling random. Some projects come off mysterious because they're undercooked. This one, at least aesthetically, feels specific, designed, like somebody actually had a mood board instead of just a fog machine and a teaser budget. Now, before we get deeper into the systems and whether this thing actually lands, quick favor. If you want more honest reviews, slightly salty design breakdowns, and me occasionally overthinking a combat loop like it's a final exam, hit like, share the show, and subscribe. It helps a ton, and it tells me you want more episodes that go past the press release fluff and into the, okay, but how does it feel stuff? Because that, right there, is where Pragmata either becomes real or collapses back into trailer smoke. Looking cool on a moon base is nice. Surviving contact with a controller in somebody's hands? Whole different game. So let's talk about the mechanical bet at the center of this thing, because Pragmata is not playing it safe. The core loop is built around dual action. Hugh handles the shooting, Diana hacks enemies in real time, and every encounter becomes this mashup of aiming, positioning, pressure management, and problem solving at once. That's the pitch. And on paper, I love this kind of swing. This is the stuff that gets me out of bed as a design nerd. Give me a game that risks being a little awkward if the reward is a combat identity I can actually remember 6 months later. The key detail here is that the hacking isn't some comfy little timeout menu where the world politely waits while you solve a puzzle. No, the pressure stays on. So instead of combat, then hacking, then back to combat, it's all blended together. You're trying to process two different layers of play at the same time. Hugh is your direct physical response, movement, shooting, immediate survival. Diana adds the cognitive layer, the open them up, disrupt them, solve the encounter under stress layer. If that clicks, that is fresh. Not fake marketing fresh, actual mechanical flavor. But, and this is the obvious pushback, this is also exactly the kind of system that can tip from inventive to overloaded in a heartbeat. I've seen it happen in puzzle action hybrids a million times. A designer falls in love with friction, and suddenly the player is not making meaningful decisions. They're just doing plate-spinning homework while getting shot at. There's a thin line between, I feel smart, and I am being asked to file taxes during a boss fight. Games cross that line more often than they want to admit. What I kept zeroing in on was whether the dual action setup creates satisfying prioritization. Like, are you reading the battlefield and making clean calls under pressure? Do I hack this target now? Do I reposition first? Do I commit to damage or buy myself space? That's the good version. The bad version is when your brain is split in two, and neither half gets to have fun. Then you're not in flow, you're in system lag. And that's death for an action game, because the whole fantasy starts to feel one input behind your intention. My honest reaction to those early fights? A little of both, if I'm being real. Not exactly clumsy, but definitely asking for trust. The first few encounters have that sensation of rubbing your belly and patting your head at the same time. You're not elegant yet. You're slightly embarrassed. You're thinking, oh cool, the game wants me to be smarter than I currently am, which can be rough for onboarding. But I also found that tension kind of addictive, because once the idea settles in your hands, the fights stop feeling like two systems stapled together and start feeling like one weird, demanding conversation between offense and access. And I think that's the whole gamble. Pragmata doesn't want to just give you targets, it wants to give you targets with locks on them, while the room is still trying to kill you. That is either going to be the reason people stick with it, or the reason they bounce off hard in the first hour. There is not a lot of middle ground on a mechanic this exposed. And honestly, that all lands better because Pragmata absolutely understands the power of vibe. This game works as a shooter, sure, but it also feels like a full-on atmosphere test. The moon-based setting does a ton of heavy lifting in the best way. It's clean sci-fi, not junkyard sci-fi. Sleek surfaces, controlled lighting, that polished isolation where everything looks expensive and slightly wrong. And running through RE Engine helps sell that immediately. There's a level of sheen here that gives the world weight. Not just good graphics in the empty marketing sense. I mean visual confidence. Stuff looks authored, specific. The game knows what shelf it belongs on. And that specificity matters because without it, the dual action combat could feel like a prototype looking for a setting. Instead, the whole package keeps nudging you toward a theme of dependency. Hugh and Diana are the emotional core, and I think that's where Pragmata is smarter than a lot of sci-fi shooters that default to gruff, lone wolf nonsense. This setup isn't really about one badass marching through a facility because he's too angry to die. It's about protection, trust, and mutual reliance. Hugh shoots, Diana hacks. One handles force, one handles access. Mechanically and emotionally, they're built around needing each other. I always like when a game tries to make its relationship show up in the play, not just in cutscenes. That's the good stuff. That's the thing that sticks. Back when I was building puzzle systems on a tiny indie budget, the dream was always getting theme and mechanics to stop feeling like roommates and start feeling like one organism. Hard to do. Super hard to do. So when I see a game even reaching for that, I pay attention. Now, does that mean everybody's going to ride with Pragmata long term? I don't know. And I mean that in the calibrated, honest review way, not the coward way. Because I can totally imagine two futures for this game. In one, people latch onto it as the kind of inventive Capcom experiment that feels different enough to matter. The combat clicks, the atmosphere carries, the Hugh and Diana dynamic gives it a center, and suddenly this thing has a real identity beyond the old trailers. In the other future, people admire it from a distance. They say, yeah, that's neat, very cool system, love the art direction, and then quietly drift back to games that ask less of them moment to moment. And maybe that's the most interesting thing about it. Pragmata doesn't strike me as a game begging to be universally liked. It feels like a game trying to justify its own weirdness. Sometimes that produces a classic. Sometimes it produces a fascinating little moon rock people keep on a shelf and point at. Either way, I'd rather play something with an actual point of view than another anonymous sci-fi hallway shooter assembled in a boardroom. If you want more reviews, rants, and game design talk from Respawn Rant, subscribe and stick around. I've been Lucas Everett, and the real test for games like this isn't whether they look futuristic. It's whether, a week later, your hands still remember how they think.